a lot of the... So Annihilation 11 is the stage of the Undertides enemies. You have the first to talk as the mini boss. You have a bunch of monsters that does sanity drain. It's a fairly annoying stage of this map, and you know, we don't need too much. The primary composition here is a Vanguard, a Chalter, Scene to cover most of the lanes, as well as a Magellan, which can actually cover the side lane. Normally, and ideally, you know, some robots would do. The Obly actually did this with basically just these three plus the Vanguard. We're adding a few more units to stabilize, and also this is my trust farm, so I'm not putting in too much effort to cut the number of ops. But I'll run it, and maybe you'll learn something. Maybe it'll just be interesting to watch for entertainment. Also, you get to watch occasionally La Pluma does the pew pew, and occasionally Chalter will do both. You know, just blow up the mini boss, and you'll see how much damage Chalter does. But yeah, so the opening is going to be pretty boring. Nothing too interesting. Standard Annihilation setup. Elysium is just chilling there, you know, gaining DP. Putting on S1, obviously, since he's the only Vanguard. Again, this is mostly a trust farm team. So we took E0 level 1 waifu. We took Yato, because these are the fast redeploys that did not have max trust. We had Silver Ash and Blemishine here because they were newly acquired and had also no trust at the time. Also, hilariously, Tequila and Chalter were chosen for the job because so Chalter, you could easily have an Ash, but we chose to take Chalter and Tequila because this Annihilation was made at the time of Dissolus, and they were trust up, but now they're 200 trust and too lazy to redo. So, you know, the standard setup, basically getting Chalter online along with a bunch of Scene drones ASAP. You want to keep Scene skill activated to ensure that you have 5 bots at the same time, but there is a chance for leaks if you time the skill a little bit more awkwardly, which is why Elysium's standing here facing up, which is why this drone, the Pluma, is there to cover the gap. And then, finally, well, you know, what you do have here is basically Maggie pacing to the right. So if you look at Obly's version, basically he had Maggie and 2 drones covering this entire lane. But in order for that to work, you need to time the Maggie skill a little bit better than what I'm able to do. So as a result, we sort of just said, you know, we have a Chalter. We need to trust from Chalter anyway at the time. So Chalter skill, but basically handle this side for the entirety of these 2 halves of the lane. So, not a whole lot of interesting going on here. We'll sort of chill and relax and hang out. As far as, you know, the skill activations go, I mean, he said that Scene skill will be, you know, activated periodically. Now, ideally with these, what happens is that Scene drones are really nice. You can actually have them in front of these things, and basically they'll actually be able to activate 2 of these stupid flowers without needing to use fast redeploys to buy yourself a little bit of additional space. Which is part of the reason why Obly was able to do a 4-op clear for this particular stage. We are lazy, so we're not going to try too hard to cut the number of ops because it turns out when you have fast redeploys that you want to trust farm anyway, it's pretty convenient. So yeah, we'll be farming for a bit, and not a whole lot going on here, just casually farming enemies. I will have to note here, the Scene and the Maggie module does also make a lot of space on the map. It lets you have additional deployments, basically allowing both Maggie and the drone and the Scene and an additional bot to be on the battlefield with basically no additional slots. It just makes everything so much more stable. It's not necessary. Again, I think Obly's video was done without the modules, but it turns out having the modules just makes life infinitely easier. So, you know, we'll happily use the modules. So yeah. So these things that come out of the top are actually pretty annoying, because what happens is that, so the first blue ones are easy. Scene, Chalter buffed, will actually very easily take care of them. What is challenging about these particular monsters is when they come later, what happens is they apply additional sanity drain to Scene. So what happens is that Scene will end up between the sanity drain from the flower and the particular flying enemies that comes out from this corner. Scene can actually sometimes fall asleep, and as a result could potentially leak some of these flying things, which gets really annoying. So you'll see later on that we place, I'll talk about it more when it happens, but you'll see later on that we end up placing a drone up here behind Maggie to try to handle the situation. But I think that's actually the biggest risk as far as sneaks go. And yeah, and as you're noticing, we're basically it's basically the sequence for scene skill activation is that whenever scene skill is up, by the way, you're seeing that one almost leak, right? So that's what I was talking about with the risk of activating scene skill, which is why Ely is chilling here. But you know, scene skill is basically activated with the easy heuristic of whenever I redeploy a box, I then activate scene skill immediately after. And that it turns out to be a really comfortable heuristic to just make sure that the number of drones are kept topped off. Because what happens is later on you might end up spending more drones or more camps than you're able to replenish. So just keeping it topped off at 5 is pretty convenient. So with these flowers, early on it's not a big deal. The blue flowers have a lot less HP, so they will actually die with just a little bit of blocking. And you notice that between Chalter healing, this drone and you know, it's basically able to stay alive with some amount of healing from this tower. And the big important thing about this truck, by the way, you'll notice that the way that we're set up, nothing is designed to hit the truck. You notice that Chalter is facing this way, you'll notice that Scene is facing down, so the truck will come this way to get here, this truck will come here to get here, and does not get hit. Keeping these trucks around actually significantly reduces the pressure of sanity drain from these mobs. So as a result, we're actually able to essentially block the flower once here, block the flower once here, and this one will not fall asleep immediately, and it actually helps a lot. So yeah, so as you can see, two blues is still fine, not a big deal. Also, by the way, notably, this La Pluma here, honestly, it'll work if you have a scene drone, but again, it's just less room for error. So at the time, I needed to trust farm La Pluma, so why not? In theory, I should be redoing my trust farm. In theory, I should be removing Tequila and Chalter from here and replace them with something else. Just because they are already 200 trust, but Chalter I think is actually too convenient to use damage-wise. So I'm kind of too lazy. I definitely don't want to remove the Chalter, but yeah, I mean, it's fine. Like, Chalter just makes this particular deployment significantly easier. But yeah, so you'll notice that what happens is that this drone gets sanity drained, and then the flower gets here, and because this truck is here, you'll notice that the sanity drain basically doesn't do enough to even put the truck to sleep, and that's really important. But yeah, so these red ones, when they start coming in multiples, you'll notice that, you know, this drone is actually taking a lot of aggro, and that's actually really helpful, because what that means is that Scene isn't falling asleep, so that in the presence of another flower, Scene will actually stay awake and make sure to prevent these things from leaking. You notice that this one is almost leaking, so this is why we ended up deploying this particular one on top to prevent the leak. So if you're doing this, you know, you probably want to have something here. I mean, honestly, if you're not trying to reduce the number of ops for trust farming purposes, like, this could just be a platinum and you would have no problems, or like any sort of sniper and you would have no problems. But you know, we're trying to cut ops. As a result, anytime that we need a sniper, we'll try to use a Maggie drone, and ultimately it gets a little bit trickier. But yeah, the blue flowers are generally pretty easy to deal with, and so long as the trucks are there, there's no reason to worry at all. And it's kind of funny as well, like, Chalter actually could potentially leak things that are over here, because when you use a Maggie drone, Maggie actually hits this tile, but Chalter actually stops and only hits this tile. So it's actually kind of funny that, like, Chalter may or may not actually perform better than a Maggie drone in this case, but overall she definitely does way more damage when the last to talk. So what happens is when the last to talk comes, Chalter just kind of makes that part trivial, whereas without Chalter here, it's actually pretty tricky to kill. You actually had to do some fancy maneuvers to make sure that the Maggie drones can kill the first to talk, and it turns out that this is just much easier, much cleaner, and much safer. So not really going to change very, very much. So yeah, you'll notice that a place of Gummy, once again, this Gummy is just there because she needed to be trust farmed anyway at the time. And it really adds a lot of security to this. One thing is that she's able to keep Chalter topped off so that Chalter doesn't die later on when she gets sanity drained because if an egg walks too close. Some of the additional points, yeah, so you'll notice that this thing just fell asleep because of this thing hitting it. Like, normally, this thing would last a lot longer. And you'll notice that, you know, this thing actually got the first one to sleep and then almost got to this part. And at this point, we retreat Ely because, you know, we have enough DP, and we open up a slot for essentially things like fast redeploys to ensure that we make space. Notice, however, that the awkward thing about this setup is that this flower, when it wakes up, immediately drains sanity for Scene, no matter where we block him. So, if a truck is here, we have no problems, but if there's no truck here, Scene's sanity drains really fast and actually falls asleep. Which, you see that almost happened there, and that's only with one flying thing. So this is why, this is probably what I think is the biggest leak potential for this particular setup. Right, and you'll notice that we stopped being able to fully top off the drones. It could be, part of it is that, and part of it is also just maybe me mismanaging that timing as well. But yeah, you'll notice that La Pluma here would kill these a lot faster, but it doesn't matter because, you know, those things are sitting there for a really long time. So these drones will be able to also be able to slap them anyway. Yeah, so over here, this guy might get sanity drained, but then, you know, Gummy will still block. And with these flowers, there's really no reason to deal that much damage to them. You can just let them drain their own HP and you'll be fine. Yeah, okay. So we are reaching the part where there's potentially some risk. So right now it's still fine. So the biggest part, I think, is the biggest problem with this particular Annihilation is actually managing the HP of these flowers. Because these guys stand here for so long that they end up taking a lot of damage from skill activations from either your sniper here or in this case our Maggie here. So you'll notice later on we eventually don't do enough damage to this and then Maggie ends up dying. But it turns out that most of the damage that Maggie takes is not from this, but from the sanity drain of this flower walking up, being blocked by Gummy but draining her sanity. I'll talk about it a little bit when that happens. But for the time being, this is fine. So this particular instance, I ended up putting down Seaboard to essentially maximize the damage to ensure that this egg dies without getting too close to Maggie. So that's why that Seaboard went down. And it also is nice to keep Chalter topped off as well, just to make sure that, again, minimum room for error. Overall, it's not a big deal because with the presence of this truck, not a whole lot of bad can happen. But, you know, just at the end of the day, a lot of Annihilations is making sure that you minimize your chances of actually leaking. And aha, Twitch chat said hello. But I need to actually at some point, I have to decide if I want Twitch chat on the actual video itself. But for the time being, not a whole lot to be seeing because I don't show my chat on the screen. But yeah, overall, I think this is just getting to the part where things are less chill. In fact, the biggest leak potential of this entire clear is actually this upcoming stage. Hopefully this clear doesn't embarrass itself and actually leak an enemy here. In which case I might have to redo. I sincerely hope not. But yeah, Scene falling asleep there could cause problems. Yeah, so over here Gummy is fine. But you'll notice that because of this, Maggie is actually taking massive sanity damage. She almost got drained. In some future cases, she actually does get drained. Okay, I don't think we're leaking anyone this time. But there's definitely leak potential, depending on the sequence of what gets done. Yeah, man. Activating Lupuma's skill is so satisfying. Okay, we're past the part with the leak potential. First to talk to comes to about people have said that Jason from Mansfield Break is the biggest joke of a boss. I personally think that for the first to talk, it's probably the biggest joke of a boss. I mean, you could say that the first to talk is not a boss, but a mini boss. But in that case, I don't even remember his name, but the priest boss, the giant tentacle monster of this event, is much better. But okay, all right, we're getting close to the final wave. I don't remember there being any leak potentials here. It's actually pretty safe. Basically, Maggie does die here. You'll notice that because of the sanity drain, but you notice that Maggie still survives. what actually finished Maggie off is when this flower comes up. So when this flower comes up, you notice that Maggie hasn't fully replenished yet. So when this flower gets here, it turns out that this flower puts Gummy to sleep, or puts, yeah, you see Maggie and Rip Maggie. Yeah, so note that, by the way, we did put a scene cam here to bait the aggro from the boss, because without this cam, if Chalter gets put to sleep, Chalter can't actually finish the first attack before he leaves. Ultimately, Chalter still will probably be able to pull this off, but it just introduces so much more room for error that we want to avoid in an Annihilation, because when you do 5 of these to get your maximum 1800 for the week, if you accidentally leak one once, there's a small chance you end up with some very, very obnoxious 5 to 10 missing randoms that you would be just looking at it and be annoyed for the rest of the week at. So, you know, generally, safety for Annihilation is probably the #1 priority, just making sure that nothing leaks randomly, or minimize the risk of leaking randomly, rather. Yeah, so at this point, you see that Chalter fell asleep, but it literally doesn't matter, because with the presence of this truck and Gummy healing, there's just nothing bad could really happen here, so we're not worried. And also notice that when we redeployed Maggie, because there's so many eggs, ultimately ended up moving for her 1 step back. Also, very cool mechanic about these drones is that they're stealthed, which prevents them from taking a lot of sanity damage. But yeah, that's our Annihilation.